Inside this room, all of my dreams become realities, and some of my realities become dreams.
What in the wide, wide world of sports is going on here? Alive! It's alive! It's alive!
You are listening to The Wilder Ride, getting wilder by the minute. Here are your hosts, Alan Sanders and Walt Murray.
Well, hey, everyone. Welcome back to The Wilder Ride, our listeners' lounge. Great pleasure to have you all joining us back in here in the lounge where you can kick back, relax, drink in hand, feet up. Make sure you don't, keep your boots off the stage. We have some decorum here. Madeline Kahn would appreciate that unless you're in show business. I'm Alan Sanders. I'm your host and joined, as always, my partner in crime, Walt Murray. Hey, buddy.
Hey, how's it going?
Great to have you with me as we continue down this new path for the first time, getting ready to do this different show. I think we've already had some pretty good responses to the solo work. We had a pretty good response to last week. So we thought, how do we top last week? But we figured the only way to do it is we're going to have to bring in somebody who's an even bigger radio star than we had last week.
Well, I was kind of thinking, man, it should not be hard to top last week, but
True. So before we get to our guest, by the way, just to tease for the audience, James Enstall from the radio show Geek to Me Radio will be joining us in just a few minutes. Walt, it's been about a week. What's been happening on your end? Any craziness that you want to dive into since the last time we recorded?
Any craziness that I want to dive into? Well, there's plenty of craziness. I mean,
Well, you are married.
I mean, yeah, I'm married and I have kids. So, in comparison to what has gone on the last few months, man, it's been smooth sailing the last few weeks. I mean, the last few days. So, one good thing is business has gotten busier, so that's a good sign. So,
that's good. Yeah. That's good. Now, folks, most of our listeners that have been listening to us for a little while probably know that you're a PI by day, a podcaster by night. But how's it been actually as a private investigator during the last 8, 9, 10 weeks when things were starting to go downhill and then all of a sudden everybody put the brakes on everything?
It has been weird because we can't really do anything in the field or we couldn't do much in the field until the last really 5 or 10 days. But, as far as like going, knocking on doors, taking witness statements, we haven't been able to do any of that. So finally, in the last few days, we've been able to get outside and see people and do that kind of stuff. So from that side, it's good. On the other end, finding people at home has been great. I've been able to actually find people locked in their houses. So that part's been good. So it's been weird. I've never experienced anything like this. None of us have, obviously. So I'm kind of glad we're getting back a little bit more towards normal.
Now, what are the big things that you guys are kind of finding yourself getting into? You said you're finally seeing business pick up. Is it the background checks as people start to come back to work? Is it the looking into whether husband or wife has gotten so sick of being in the house with the same person that they've decided they want to shack up with someone else? I mean, what are you guys chasing?
Yes and yes. Little bit from column A, a little bit from column B. Yeah, the big, we do a ton of pre-employment background checks, sometimes up to 1,500 to 2,000 a day. We are not back to that level yet, but we're getting there. We're starting to see some daylight. So that part's great. And then on the PI side too, a lot more. Well, now that courts are getting closer to reopening, a lot of those lawsuits are starting to pick back up again. So that's good business for us as well. So, we get out and do interviews, background checks.
Well, since the last time we met, since the last time you and I hung out, the wife and I did one of those staycations, did a little camping by the lake.
Yeah.
And it was kind of cool because we invited 2 other couples with us. We've gone camping together before. Ironically, my wife's best friend and my friend as well, that we've been couple friends for a long, long time. Their son married a daughter who is obviously now couple 3. And we became friends with couple 3 because we would hang out with their kids when they were here before moving to Colorado. So we all kind of connected. We all played trivia together once a week. And so we've done this before. This was the first time though that it was really kind of interesting because here we are outdoors, sunshine, lots and lots of blue sky, beautiful. The weather could not have been more perfect. We're right by the lake. And every now and then I watch someone go kayaking by with a mask on. I'm like, there's not a soul within like 300 yards. And if you're worried about the speedboat going by that's about 200 yards away, you better worry more about your kayak tipping over rather than anybody sneezing on you.
Well, I have to wonder how many people are wearing them at home. I mean, I see people everywhere riding by themselves in cars with them. I feel like I'm either about to go into surgery or I'm about to get robbed.
So, here we are. We're out in the nature. The coolest thing was the Park Service was very careful because it is a part of the Bartow County Parks and Rec. They didn't want anybody staying too close on top of one another, which once again, I don't know if you've ever gone camping in one of these campsites. It's not like these sites are 6 feet away from each other. There's some pretty good distance.
Yeah. No,
they wanted us to stay every other campsite. Well, the problem is the area that they said our tent would fit, it wouldn't fit our tent. We had no choice but to move to the one spot that was right next to friends of ours. But it was probably 15 feet away at the closest point, and then maybe 7 or 8 feet up. So I guess in terms of, contagion, had they sneezed and it was going downwind, it would have probably carried into our tent, but all of ours wouldn't have made it uphill. So they were safe. We took the risk.
But calling what you have a tent is the biggest misidentification of anything I've ever seen in my life. Like, you can't get your tent in one picture.
It is a 16 foot by 16 foot. You can walk into this thing standing straight up.
And it has a kitchen, built-in flat screens throughout the mansion.
No, we don't bring TVs. We don't bring TVs. We bring computers.
Yeah, I was going to say, it has a desk.
Because we're dorks. But no, you know what? We get a lot of questions about our camping gear. Every time we go camping, we know you can't, well, at least I can't. We can't afford to just go buy everything all at once. So the first time we went camping, we had one of those little small kind of tents that you kind of crawled in and you could sit up in, but you couldn't stand. And eventually we found a sale where we could upgrade the tent. We upgraded to some tables. We realized we needed some cookware. Every time we kind of realized, okay, to make this a little more fun, less, maybe less like camping and more like glamping, what else can we buy? And the coolest thing my wife got this last time was a table. All these campsites, usually unless you do the primitive site, have water and power. And it's just basically a spigot like on the side of your house. So we've always had just a hose to rinse dishes or wash hands. She bought a thing on Amazon where you take the hose and plug it underneath this table that's hooked to an actual kitchen sink. We literally had a kitchen sink at the campsite.
That's pathetic.
And it was just the same water we would normally use, the same hose, but instead of it being like this gusher and just going muddy all over, you put a 5-gallon bucket under the drain to catch the water, and you just use it like a regular sink. It was awesome.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've actually seen it drive through places for restaurants. They're using that same thing to let employees wash their hands during the day. So, that's a nice setup.
Yeah. You know what? Sometime in the near future, when you find yourself maybe spending the day on the lake and we happen to be camping at the same time, you can take us tooling around and you can come hang out and drink some beers with us.
Hey, I'm all for that.
Because you know what? You and I, we hang out. We're not worrying about being within more than 6 feet of each other, are we?
No, I'm not. I'm not concerned. Hey, man, I figure when I made it to 50, I've kind of accomplished everything I needed to in life. So what the hell?
See, I'm almost there. Well, I say almost. I've got a half the year to go. So anyway, anything else going on with you before we get to our guest? I mean, because our camping was awesome. We just did the whole glamping thing. Like I said, for us, it was, I still got up, did radio, still did work, but it was kind of nice to have a change of pace.
Yeah, I've just kind of decided over the last few weeks I'm going to be boring, and the biggest thing I've done lately is buy a chainsaw and cut down everything in my yard. So, nobody wants to hear about that, so I'm ready to talk to James.
Excellent. Well, then, without further ado, let's go ahead and introduce to you fine folks listening to the Wilder Ride Listeners Lounge, our good buddy, James Enstall from the radio show Geek to Me Radio. James, welcome to the program. Thank you so much for being here. You are actually our second guest since we started this new format.
Thanks for having me. I'm used to being number 2.
Who does number 2 work for? You know what's great is I don't even have to explain that, and all three of us already know exactly what movie we're talking about.
Yeah, baby.
Yeah, baby, yeah. That's the kind of guest we like. So, James, tell us a little bit about what's been going on with you, because you're not in Georgia. You're kind of in the Midwest, in the what's it, the gateway to the West in Missouri, or do you say Missouri? How do you guys pronounce it?
No, it's Missouri. Only the fancy politicians say Missouri when they're out trying to appeal to the more rural people for some reason. I don't understand.
To the great state of Missouri.
Yeah.
Like, what? You don't say that normally. Yeah, but I'm running for office.
Right. There's not an A on the end. So no, we always say Missouri, but who knows? It's, you say potato, I say vodka.
Yeah, you know what? I get plenty of starch and I get plenty of liquid with my ice. So.
Exactly.
Well, James, we stumbled across each other thanks to a mutual friend of ours who was our guest last week, BK on the Air, because you guys shared some similar interest in some of your formatting and content for your radio shows. So let's introduce everybody to you by going to the Wayback Machine and saying, James, how did you decide radio was going to be something you want to do, and that number two, it was going to be Geek to Me Radio?
I was just looking for a change. It's everyone has their day job in radio, like you have to do. But before I ever got into radio, I had my day job, wanted to do something different. The person I was dating at the time, their dad said, you know what? Broadcast Center here in St. Louis. You might want to check that out. So I did, and got I'm using air quotes for those of you who can't see me, degree in broadcasting, and got hired on at KTRS, the Big 550 here in St. Louis, at my first job, just answering phones and working the board. Got onto a show that was doing trivia on Saturday nights from 9 till midnight. And he asked me, he's like, hey, do you want to do some kind of a fun segment? So I said, yes, I'd love to do something about, the pop culture realm. So we started a segment called It's All Geek to Me. And that lasted until the show went off the air completely. And then another radio station said, hey, we heard your segment on that show. Would you be interested in having your own show? And of course, the answer is always yes when someone says something like that to you. So went over there and started my 1-hour radio show on Saturdays, moved to Sundays, just covering the world of pop culture, comic books, movies, TVs, and video games.
So, James, is that something that you've had a lifelong interest in, or is that something that you kind of came to later? How did you get the passion that you have for those types of things?
Yeah, I was the nerdy kid. I always had my Star Wars figures, transitioned to my He-Man action figures. From there, went into Transformers, and I was always had all the toys, read the comic books, watched all the cartoons. When Saturday mornings still had cartoons, you'd wake up and you'd have your big bowl of Count Chocula because the monster cereals were out all year round in the 80s. And you'd sit down and watch, GoBots on Saturday mornings and Silverhawks and Transformers and stuff like that. And that's kind of, I've never grown up. I'm still an 8-year-old. So that's kind of the secret.
I got to go back. I know my dad passed away 3 years ago. I got to check his itinerary. Being in the military, he traveled around a lot. I got to figure out how I didn't know about my brother from another mother in the state of Missouri, because you just described my entire upbringing in the 80s as well, watching those exact same cartoons and TV shows and being the oldest of four. With the weirdest thing about being the oldest, you would think, well, yeah, you get more responsibility, but because I was taking care of my younger brothers, I was always watching the same cartoons. So I was sort of using that as the excuse, as even at the age of 14 or 15, saying, well, it's better than watching, Sesame Street. At least we're watching Transformers and robots fighting each other.
Exactly. It's cultured.
Yes, it definitely is. Well, and you came up I think I'm a couple of years older than both of y'all, but came up in that era of Star Wars really just blowing us away and opening a whole new realm for a lot of us. And when you kind of embraced that that nerd culture or geek culture, whatever we want to call it, how was that received by the people around you? Did you kind of go through some of the same stuff that we went through of, what's your problem and why don't you like sports more than anything and all that stuff?
Yeah, I think it's a double-edged sword because I feel like I came up at the perfect time to enjoy all of that stuff when it was fresh and it was out there. I got it firsthand. Like I've got so many friends of mine who I'll talk about arcades, and some of my friends are 20 years younger and they're like, oh, you're so lucky that you got to experience that. And so I am glad, but at the same time, it's a double-edged sword because it wasn't cool then. I was getting picked on, and the jocks in my class were like, what are you reading a comic book for, you big nerd? As I'm sitting there, in study hall. So it was a double-edged sword. I'm glad I came up with it. I did, but it'd be so cool to be coming into it now when it is all mainstream.
How much fun is it to be able to say that the books, the comic books we were reading, the cartoons we were watching, the graphic novels we were diving into are now the mainstream of Hollywood movies in the blockbusters year round now?
Yeah, it's amazing. I always tell when I have people on my show and I talk to them, I'm like, it's a great time to be alive if you're in this culture, because it's so accessible. And especially with social media, you can actually tweet at Chris Hemsworth, who plays Thor, and stuff like that, where you wouldn't have been able to do that even 10 years ago. So it's really an amazing time to see all this kind of come to fruition.
Well, one of the things that really resonated with me last night is I was watching the documentary that Alan had recommended last week on Galaxy Quest. And one of the people being interviewed on that show said, we live in a weird time where the geeks have inherited the earth.
So true.
And it really did resonate with me, because I grew up playing sports and stuff, but in high school I was mostly running cross country, which is kind of the nerdiest of the sports, I think. But I was into all that stuff too, all the sci-fi, and a lot of the stuff I read was sci-fi and fantasy, and you just kind of almost felt like you were, like your shoes were on the wrong foot all the time when it came to dealing with, other popular people and things. And I know as I got older and started running into more and more people who were into that stuff, it was almost like feeling like you're at home. And so when I listened to your show, it is that you have that nostalgic feeling, but you also feel like, man, these are people I can really relate to. And I kind of find that with your audience and with BK's audience as well, just that we all went through that shared experience of not really fitting in completely because of the stuff that we were into, but then now really being able to look back and go, man, remember how great that was, and seeing that celebrated in our culture is really pretty awesome.
Yeah, there's no doubt. It's like I said, it's a great time because you've got the people who are like in our age demographic who grew up with it. You've got the older people who kind of remember it fondly, like, oh, you know what? Yeah, my kid used to watch that. Or, oh, I used to watch, Buck Rogers, and we had Gil Gerard on the show. And then you got the people now who are young and they think this is just the coolest thing ever because, oh, Thor, that's, on the big screen. Yeah, I love Chris Evans as Captain America, without then realizing as I pull out 3 long boxes of comics and say, read up, kid, this is where it came from.
Well, and it's commendable that you still have that. I know most of my comics have been lost over the years, and I just hate it because I probably had 4 years of Sergeant Rock and just some of the other great comics, a ton of Spider-Man, and who could have anticipated that all that stuff would now be really valuable for one thing, but something that we are wishing that we hung on to.
And again, it's such a cool thing too, because obviously I'm not sponsored by these people, so this is not a plug for them, but the DC Universe app, you can actually go, if you're subscribed to that, you can go and read the past 10 years of Batman comics and everything. So again, it's kind of cool. It's like, oh, I used to have all these. Now there's an app where you can literally read the comic books on your phone, which is crazy.
That's amazing.
All right. Well, then this leads me to a question then. Because I still have a lot of, in fact, almost every comic I ever collected. I was in that place where thankfully I thought about putting them in bags. And so they've just been sort of with me in the boxes that I can move from house to house as I've gone on for the last, 25, 30 years of my life. I still like the tangible touch of going through the comic book. How does it feel to try to do that on an iPhone or a tablet or, on your computer screen?
It's not the same for me. I have a huge comic book collection. I've kind of slowly started to whittle it down and have to sell stuff off. Unfortunately, just stuff comes up and you have to pare things down and let things go. But it's not the same. I remember when I was in late grade school, junior high, we'd go to a comic book store and I'd open up the comics. And if I was lucky enough to find a comics from the 60s or 70s, it would have that smell. The 80s comics now that I have, like I just went back and read my Paul Kupperberger, Jack Kirby Superpowers series, and they have that smell that the 60s comics had when I was younger. And I just, there's that feel of the suppleness of the comic book, able to turn the pages, the art's right there. It's not the same online.
Walt?
Yeah, sorry. I was just downloading the DC Universe app.
It's well worth it. Start watching Young Justice. You'll love it.
Okay, yeah, I was just accepting the terms and conditions. So
leave it to my co-host. We're not even 20 minutes in, and he's already searching for stuff. Mr. ADD over here. That's his superpower. It's like, I can't think of any one thing for more than 3 minutes at a time.
Oh, no,
even then, that's a stretch.
Now I can think of the DC Universe the rest of the afternoon.
Maybe they should be my sponsor. I just got them some business. What's going on?
Yes, you did. Well, let me ask you a quick question. I know one of the things that amazed me about your show is that one afternoon I was listening and Gene Simmons called you dude or something. I can't remember what it was. And I remember tweeting at you. I was like, Gene Simmons just called you dude. So you've had some great guests on. Who are some of the people that you've been able to interview over the years of being on your show?
Oh my gosh. I've been so lucky that I have a lot of very, very kind people agree to be on the show. As you guys know, working with BK and everything like that, having a radio show kind of does elevate your status somehow, because I know there are so many podcasts out there that are far, far better than my radio show. But for some reason, like I've approached some guests and I've said, hey, I'd love to have you on my show. And they kind of look at me and go, oh, what's the name of your podcast? And I say, no, we're on 105.3 FM. And their whole expression changes. Oh, yeah, let's set that up. It's very bizarre. So I think that's been part of my good fortune, is to have the radio show behind me to get some of these guests. But we just had Ed Asner on for the whole hour, who was just a lovely man. We had Henry Winkler. I'm a big fan of voice actors. So we've had Tara Strong, who voices Harlequin and Batgirl. We've had Susan Eisenberg, who voices Wonder Woman. Phil Lamar, who is the man of a million voices. We had executive producer, writer Dean Devlin, who did Independence Day and Leverage and the new series Almost Paradise. We talked to him and Christian Kane. You mentioned Gene Simmons. We've had just a...
No, wait a second. I want to get through the rest of the list, but how in the world do you go from all of the stuff that has to do with comic book movies, superheroes, voiceovers, Gene Simmons, the Demon of Kiss?
Well, obviously he was in that Marvel series.
It's true.
Him and Stan Lee, he talked about it on the show. They flew up to New York, where they were doing the printing press, and they all put their blood in the red ink. And he talked about that experience. He said Stan Lee was just super excited and exuberant. But we had him because Wizard World came through St. Louis, and they offered Gene Simmons as one of the people, hey, would you like to talk to him for your radio show to promote his appearance at Wizard World? And of course, the answer is yes. I'd love to have Gene Simmons on the show.
The answer is always yes.
Absolutely. Why would I want that hack?
I was holding out for Peter Criss, but I took what I got. So.
Well, let me ask this thing, because that's sort of Walt and I, it's amazing. For the fact that he can't focus, we do share some of the same brain cells. And I was thinking the same thing about how your show differs from BK in the sense that you seem to have a lot of these, not just big named guests, but a lot of the guests that people would recognize if you told them the cartoons they worked on or the commercials they did or whatever they did in the background. How did you start to cultivate that? Was it by going to the conventions? I know you said radio gives you that added little layer of credibility, but at some point you still have to reach out and hope that somebody responds to you.
Yeah, the conventions are a great way to do it. A lot of times I go to the conventions just to network, and I'll immediately talk to whoever is running their marketing. I'll reach out, 3 months before the con starts, says, hey, I'd love to have this person to promote your convention. And a lot of times they want the press. So they're like, yeah, let me see who we can get for you. Or I will reach out directly to the celebrity who's going to be there, because I've in the past broadcast my show live from the conventions. And again, it's an amazing time to be alive. We do it through my cell phone. My producer calls me on the Skype function on my cell phone. I've got the little microphone plugged into my cell phone, so I can just stand there and interview the guest live on air. And it goes back, it sounds like I'm sitting in the studio. So we've actually had several guests on like that, because I'm right there with them, and I say, hey, we're about to be live on air. Could we talk to you about your current book / movie / whatever it is they're promoting? And the answer is generally yes.
All right, so Walt, what I'm hearing right now is you and I have an obligation here to figure out what we need to send James surreptitiously to get him to be our producer, so we can start funneling some of these folks over to our listeners' lounge.
I would assume that what we would need to send him is money to get him to do that.
Money is always good.
Money works.
Well, James, let me ask you, some of the names that you threw out there, of course, are people that we've known our whole lives. And when you talk about somebody like Henry Winkler or somebody like that, have you had anybody who you've interviewed who you were really surprised by who they were or who they came across as up against the character or who you assumed that they were?
I don't know about surprised. Usually, the one thing I try to do, if I know I'm going to go after a certain guest, I try to do my research, kind of know what they're in, what what they're currently promoting, what they've done. So I don't just sit there and say, like Chris Farley, so you remember that time you were in that movie? That was cool. So I don't want to be that guy. So I usually try to find something unique, and I listen to a few other interviews they've done, so I don't ask them questions that they've heard already 3 or 4 times and try to keep it a fresh interview. But I will say I've actually cultivated a few, I guess, dare say friendships through this, because like Susan Eisenberg, who voices Wonder Woman in the Justice League animated series, she voiced a couple of Jedi Knights in some of the Star Wars games. She's going to be doing Kevin Smith's reboot of Masters of the Universe. She will be voicing the Sorceress. For all those 80s fans out there, it sounds like it's going to be a really great reboot. Kevin Smith knows his stuff. But I've actually kind of developed a friendship with her and other people who they've started following me on Twitter, and I don't want to push too hard, but occasionally I'll be like, hey, is there any way we could talk about this? And they'll message me back, yeah, we can arrange something. So I think the most surprising thing is just how very genuine some of these people truly are. Ed Asner was an amazingly kind man, because he's got that gruff demeanor in just about all the movies, the Lou Grant Show and things like that. You think of him, but he's so funny, very, very nice, very generous with his time. I asked him, how long do I have you for? He said, as long as you want. I'm retired. So
yeah, I thought that was a great interview. It really came across as one that there was some warmth between y'all. It wasn't just you throwing questions at him and him throwing answers back, but you really did kind of get the sense that he enjoyed that conversation with you.
And that's always my hope. I try to gauge. It's easier to do when I'm face to face with someone at a convention. I can kind of see if their eyes are looking around. Are they kind of getting bored? Are they over this? And it's harder to do on the phone, but I usually try to find that spot where I don't take up too much of their time. But if they're going with it and seem to be in the groove, I'll kind of let it go for a while. And if I've got to edit it down to fit within the time frames of the show, that's the least of my worries.
How many times do you have that feeling of, holy crap, I just interviewed whoever?
I will let you guys in on a secret. The only other person who knows this is my wife. Now that I'm doing a lot of these interviews here at home, I'm not going into the studio for them. So I'm setting them up and recording them all here. There are a couple people who I will actually pour a rather stiff drink before I talk to them, because it's a little nervous going in and talking to someone like Ed Asner, or I had Dean Devlin and Christian Kane both Skyping simultaneously to talk about their brand new show that's on WGN America called Almost Paradise. And it's a bigger name. I still get those nerves no matter how many people I've interviewed.
Wow. And sometimes that doesn't ever go away. And the fact is, though, you don't go fanboy. It doesn't sound like it. And I think that's the most important thing. Like you said, you're not pulling that, gosh, remember that time you did that? you can't do that, because you'll lose the credibility. They'll say, that's not the kind of show you want to be on. And thankfully, maybe the stiff drink works. You've been doing a great job getting these guests and making it very conversational. And that's, something Walt and I both have said we strive for as well. We like to just kind of sit back and give a sense that that's why we're calling it our listeners lounge. Like, you're kicking back, relaxed, and listening to some folks talk about what they've done, who they've met, what they're doing, what their plans are. And I like that kind of easy conversational feel, kind of like just a couple of guys in a pub, just talking with a drink in hand.
That's what I always preface the interview before I start talking to whoever it is. I always say, just to let you know, I want this to sound very conversational. So I don't actually have like a list of questions in front of me, because I don't want to sound like, okay, I answered that question, check. Here's the next question. I just kind of keep it. I said, if I say something to you that kind of gets something churning in your mind, feel free to steer the conversation, because I don't want this to sound like a Q&A. People can go to a Comic-Con and sit in a panel in a big ballroom and get that. So I want this to be kind of a little more intimate, like someone's listening in on a talk between 2 or 3 people.
And, I think that works better, because some of these folks, like you said, have had so many interviews. So much of it is all digital now. You can look so much up on YouTube and other podcasts. Why sound like everybody else? So few people, for some reason, don't take that conversational approach. And you know what? If you don't get to all your questions, oh well, it just sounds so much better when it's just 2 people or 3 people just kind of kicking back and talking and seeing where the conversation goes.
Exactly. Yeah, I think the biggest compliment that I can get personally, and I've had a few people tell me they said they'll either say something to the effect that they'll just flat out say that was a really great interview, or they'll say at the end of the conversation, "Wow, you took me down some roads I've never gone before. That was really fun." And that is it's a highlight for me.
You should try having Walt as a co-host. Talk about roads less traveled.
Stream of consciousness.
My mind is a swirling dervish.
Cascading into an whirlpool of infinity.
Of creative alternatives. Ditto. Yeah, Walt's the ditto.
I am the ditto. I am definitely the ditto.
I'll go on for about 14 minutes introducing something and Walt will go, yeah.
What he said.
All right, well, James, let's get back to your station then, because during the COVID-19, what changed for you? Obviously, one of the things you mentioned was having to do more of it from home. Are you starting to see getting back to a studio? Are you a pre-formatted show now where you kind of produce it all ahead of time and it just plays? What kind of format do you follow right now, and where do you see it going, assuming the state is starting to look at lifting some of its sanctions?
Actually, at the moment, I am transitioning radio stations. The station that I was on was recently bought out, and it was a Catholic radio station, decided to buy them, and they got rid of all the personnel, all the shows. They cleaned house top to bottom. And so I'm actually talking to 2 other radio stations right now to see about what we can work out as far as getting my show on there and getting a time. So right now, everything I've been doing is online. So this, in a weird way, couldn't have happened at a better time, because I can just do everything from home now and upload it myself. And I just kind of, to keep myself in the habit, I've got my show sheet that my producer gives me, and I try to keep everything in segments. I've got a 11-minute segment up front, a 9-minute segment for the second one, and keep it to that just to stay in the practice.
Yeah, that's a good habit to be in, especially because there is a big difference between podcasting and terrestrial radio. And I do think folks that maybe are a little older or established, I don't mean a little older like in their 70s, like our ages, we're not talking about 20-year-olds who grew up with internet. The idea of being on the radio, as you said, is kind of a cool thing. And it does add a layer of credibility that maybe a younger generation wouldn't care. But when it comes to following that format, it's rigid. It's live. You if you crash and burn, you crash and burn. There's no going back and saying, hey, let's redo that.
Exactly. Yeah, I kind of like that performing without a net, if you will.
Well, you know what? And I want to get into this part of your background, because we talked about this in a different podcast I was on not that long ago. The difference between podcasting to me and live radio is one's like a movie. You can have take after take after take, and then you can get into the editing suite and craft the perfect arrangement of scenes to set the stage, set the tone. But a live radio is like theater. It's live. And once the lights go up until the show ends, you're live and you go with it.
Yes, that's very true. That's a perfect analogy, actually. Yeah.
And you have a background in theater. So let's talk about your acting background.
Yeah, it's not much to talk about. I went all the way through.
You know what? There are no small actors. There's only Walt.
That's right. Who played the smallest part in the world.
See, and again, that's the smallest parts can sometimes bring you the most joy. That's what I always say. I always tell myself this anyway. But no, it's I went to college at Westminster College here in Fulton, Missouri, where the Winston Churchill gave his famous Iron Curtain speech. And I double majored in poli-sci and psychology, and got out and decided, I'd like to try acting. So had no experience. I had started doing some community theater shows that led to kind of getting an agent to kind of do some larger local commercials, which kind of got into a couple national commercials. At one point in December 2012, I was doing TV commercials, live radio, street performing, and theater all at the same time in the same month, which was a thrill. I loved it. I love performing.
Those are a lot of hats to wear at the same time.
It is, but if you're going to juggle it, you might as well juggle chainsaws. That's what I always say.
Now, once again, I got to figure out where my dad was in the at the time of your birth, or about 9 months prior, because I have a theater background as well, and I've always found, even though I've got a degree in psychology, go figure, that being on stage has kind of prepared me for being on radio, because it is immediate, and you have to always think, whether you have one person in the house or you have a full house, everybody paid for the same level of performance. They are expecting to see the show that you're putting on, regardless of how big the house is. And I think that's been a great thing for, at least for me in radio, is learning it's all about the audience. It's not, it's great that I'm on the air, but if it's not about the audience, if I don't keep them in mind, at some point I'll be playing to an empty house.
Exactly right. And I think too, part of the someone who's very natural on stage, it'll come across just like it will on the radio. If you're a natural talker, like conversational, like the three of us are doing right now, or if you're having fun and your guest on the radio or your fellow actors, if you look like you're having fun on stage, that's going to come across, and the audience will enjoy it more. Whether you're performing on the radio or you're doing a stage play, if you're having fun, the audience will have fun.
I talked to a lot of people learning how to do voiceover, even just for commercials. And I said, if you're supposed to be cheery, smile while you're recording. It'll come through. It's this weird thing you just sense if someone's really feeling the moment, and act it out. Even though you're in a room by yourself recording a commercial, you still have to put on a performance that matches the tone of the piece you're recording.
Exactly right. That's correct.
Well, and as a avid lifelong radio listener, a lot of times you can tell when the personality is phoning it in. And so many times I've listened to somebody on the radio and I've sent Alan a text and I've been like, yeah, their heart's not in it anymore. And within 6 months, that person's moving on somewhere else. I mean, you can just tell when they're done. And that's not something I've ever heard when I've listened to your show or whatever. And one thing that I wanted to ask you about, you tend to do a lot of movie reviews. And it seems like every movie that you review, if you hate it, I tend to kind of fall into that same category. If you love it, it tends to be a movie that I love. What are some of the movies that you're looking forward to coming out in the next few months as we hopefully get out of all the COVID lockdown?
I am a movie buff. It takes a lot for me to say a movie's bad, and I try not to be a negative person anyway. So even my negative reviews of stuff usually aren't like, this movie was awful. But I'm very much looking forward to, I think you could literally bring back a CGI redo of Old Yeller, and I'd be thrilled to see it at this point in the theater, just because I want to go back and be in a movie theater. But I know Black Widow is something that I'm anticipating. Wonder Woman, it's set in the 80s, for crying out loud, so it's the best of both worlds. It's DC superheroes set in the 1980s. I'm thrilled. I think the last one I saw before all the COVID thing went in full swing was probably Bloodshot, which was another Valiant comic book movie, which I actually liked for the most part. A lot of my fellow reviewers were not so kind, but I actually enjoyed it. But I just think anytime any of these movies coming back, I've actually lost track of where we are and what's coming out and what got pushed back and what went direct to video with Amazon Prime now. I know Minions was supposed to have been out this summer. I'm not sure if that got moved, but yeah, I'm thrilled to be in the movie theater again. I don't care what I see.
Yeah, I'm the same way. Every time I drive by the theater and see cars out front, I'm like, okay, good, we're close. We're getting there.
Yeah,
we're getting there. Well, we did a story last week, and I don't know if you covered this at all, James, with your research, but a lot of the studios are recognizing that there's no content yet, even though some states are opening their theaters. And I don't know if any are doing it around you yet. Nobody here in my community yet, but they were saying we're going to make a lot of maybe the 80s movies, late 70s, early 80s movies like Jaws, Poltergeist, up to the 90s with the Harry Potter series. They were going to make these movies available at sort of, quote, nostalgia throwback prices of anywhere from $2 to $5 a ticket, just so the theater chains have something to start showing to try to coax people back into the theater.
I think that's brilliant. And a lot of these movies, I know they are one of my show sponsors, Marcus Theaters, who also owns Movie Tavern. They have done those retro series before, and they've been very popular. Like during Christmas, they'll show Christmas Vacation on a limited Friday and Saturday night engagement at some of their theaters, and those are hugely popular. So I think, A, the idea that people want to get back in the theaters and they want to go see a movie, and B, the nostalgic aspect of those movies being seen in the big screen, I think that's a no-brainer. That'd be great.
I'm really hoping that some of the chains and the people that are listening to the show and listening to you and listening to us, whatever, start to really push that, because the studios were saying that they weren't planning to charge a lot to the theater owners. They know it's hard times, that they were looking to just put something that we know were hits in the theater, like Back to the Future, like Star Wars. I don't think Star Wars is actually part of it, but like Jaws, put movies in there that people would be like, okay, I'm guaranteed a good time.
Yeah.
It's not an unknown.
Yeah, bring back Raiders of the Lost Ark or Blade Runner or Nightmare Before Christmas, something with a nostalgic aspect that people are going to want to come out and they're going to want to bring their kids to, especially because obviously some weird movies have come out lately that are kids movies that actually did well. I don't know why, but yeah, I think that's a win-win for everybody.
Well, and if any of them are listening, there's a great actor that I've heard of who I would love to see some of his movies make it back to the big screen. It's Gene somebody. And he had a movie called Young Frankenstein, another one called Blazing Saddles that I'd love to see get back in the theater.
Hackman?
Yeah, Gene Hackman. Now, Gene Hackman was in one of them, but
he was in Young Frankenstein.
True, yeah. That's right.
No, wouldn't that be cool? I have never seen Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory on the big screen.
That would be a great one.
I've never seen it on the big screen.
Theater.
No, I don't think I have either. No, I think I've seen Young Frankenstein at a Halloween retro thing they had, but that's about the only Gene Wilder one I've seen on the big screen.
Wow, that'd be really, really cool. James, we've got a few more minutes in our guest segment here, and what I want to do is kind of turn it back over to you to sort of give you the chance to pitch what you're doing, where people can hear it. I know you said you're transitioning from one station to looking at some opportunities at maybe some other stations, but if there's a backlog of podcast episodes where you sort of keep it for posterity or people can hear and follow up and maybe learn a little bit more about Geek to Me Radio, how can they do that? And how can they maybe reach out to you via social media?
Yep. I'm on all the social medias, Instagram and Twitter. I'm very active there at Geek to Me Radio. It's Geek TOME Radio, and Facebook.com/Geek to Me Radio. I try to post there. I'm not as good about it, but my producer always kind of nudges me and tells me to put something up. You can go to my YouTube channel. If you go to YouTube, just find Geek to Me Radio. The shows are up there, so you can listen very quietly at work with your headphones in, so nobody knows you're listening. And then all the podcasts always go up anywhere you find the podcasts for SoundCloud, Podomatic, iTunes, Google Play, iHeartRadio. And I do have some interviews that are taped but I have not aired yet. We talked to Emily Swallow, who was the armorer from The Mandalorian. We've got an interview coming up with her and a few others that I have yet to start editing. But we've talked to some composers lately who are just fascinating people to talk to. And we just talked to Paul Leonard Morgan, who just scored Tales from the Loop, which is on Amazon Prime, a very interesting series if you've not had a chance to see that. But composers, I love talking to them because they're very interesting. They're formulaic. They're very creative people. So we've got a few of those coming down the pike as well. So just follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Geek to Me Radio. And I always put notifications for when a new show is about to drop. And I always put links to the new shows there.
That is awesome. Some great content, folks. We would not have James join us if we didn't know that he could help spruce up our image and give us some credibility as well. So that's why we brought him on, to be in our listeners lounge for all the folks out there, and engage with him on social media, because you know how James was talking about reaching out to these people or managers or marketing people and getting those relationships. It works both ways, and he likes to talk to his fans every bit as much. And I've seen him retweet stuff that we've put out and vice versa. So he's a great guy to have in your corner, because you never know who he might be interviewing next.
That's true. Thanks so much. I appreciate that, guys. That's very kind of you to say.
You're welcome. Now, James, we do a couple of additional segments, but we always give the guests the option. We go into an odd news, and we wrap up with sort of like what we've been listening to, watching, or reading, or maybe even listening to. Would you want to hang out and kind of throw some improv around and just kind of see what we do for the next 15, 20 minutes?
Yeah, we can hang on for another 15. Sure.
Walt, it's time for us to look at some news.
Yeah, I don't know that that's what this really is, but and these two stories, I don't know which one to start with. Well, to keep with our Florida theme, let's go with a Florida woman who was charged with setting fire to a home over a missing towel.
I want my $2. No, I want my towel.
Well, and this is from the Associated Press, so it actually is real news, and it's from a county I can't pronounce. But Hawthorne, Florida, a Florida woman set fire to a converted woodshed that another woman was living in following an argument over a missing towel, authorities said. Robin Hamilton, 57, so she's old enough to know better, was arrested shortly after Saturday's fire behind her Hawthorne trailer home, the Gainesville Sun reported. A woman told the county deputies that she was renting the shed from Hamilton and living there with her 2 dogs. The woman said Hamilton had been drunk. Surprise.
No, alcohol doesn't play a part into a Florida person's story.
Oh, no, not at all. But the woman said Hamilton had been drunk and threatened to, quote unquote, burn her out because of a missing towel that had substantial value to Hamilton. About 20 minutes after the fight, the tenant said she smelled something burning and saw smoke. The woman said she got out of the shed, but Hamilton told detectives she didn't know how the fire started. A neighbor's surveillance camera showed Hamilton crouched next to the shed several times just before the building caught fire. Hamilton faces charges of attempted murder, arson, and animal cruelty. She's been held with $80,000 bond. So if anybody has $80,000 around and really wants somebody to party with, there you go.
Listen. I know you took my towel. Okay, I know you took it. Okay, and I'm gonna get it back because that towel is well worth $80,000.
Definitely.
Okay,
definitely.
It's amazing what we convince ourselves of when we're not in the right state of mind.
Yes, thank you, alcohol.
Alcohol, the solution to and cause of all of man's problems. Well, I've got one. James, you've been talking about doing a lot of stuff remotely, and Walt, I know you've probably had to do some Zoom calls. I know I've even had some of the boards I've served on in the community that I live in. We've had to have board meetings via Zoom. So check this story out. If you are getting tired of the Zoom meetings, one woman's husband has decided to help spruce up the atmosphere for all of her fellow employees. It started off, innocuously enough, dressing like a cowboy, kind of sitting in the background at the table, waiting to see if anybody noticed. But as people started saying, is that a cowboy in the background? Every time they started having a new meeting, they would have a different person to look at. Her husband decided it was time to play dress up. Everything from Where's Waldo to an actual full Batman costume. This guy is dressing up and everyone at her company is loving it. She's getting notes that say, that's awesome. Funniest thing I've seen. This is the best. Can we give him suggestions on what to wear the next time? Hysterical. You've got a great sense of humor. Your husband's awesome. But it's not just her LinkedIn connections that adored what he was doing. Her colleagues also are enjoying it, saying they love it. It's so strange to see a team of people laughing suddenly because they realize what's creeping into the edge of the frame. It could be anything. And they are just enjoying bringing a little bit of laughter by playing a little dress up. So who knows, you guys, I'm not suggesting you try that depending on your boss and your tenor at wherever you're doing your Zoom meetings. But one woman has decided her husband is actually doing something worthwhile, still acting like a 14-year-old.
That's awesome. I want to go get my cosplay pieces out now.
Isn't that cool? And some of the pictures, if you go look up the story, it's I think she's from Indiana. The pictures are fantastic. The Where's Waldo one is so funny because he's standing basically in plain sight. He's wearing the red and white striped shirt and the hat, and he's just standing like a statue. Like, can't see me. sort of like Drax in
that's right, he's invisible.
Yeah, you can't see me. I'm not here. I can see you. No, you can't.
I've mastered the art of keeping perfectly still.
Well, I've talked to so many friends who are like, another Zoom call. So I know that all those folks are like, hey, that is exactly what we need here.
Yeah, I think my office needs to start implementing topless Zoom call Fridays. Maybe that would get people to log on.
Hey, I've seen some of the board members I serve with. I'm not sure that'd be the best idea in the world.
That's true, yes. Yeah, if you're on the board of Weight Watchers, that might not be something anyone would want to see.
Well, speaking of bad ideas, the Huffington Post is blessing us with this disaster. 2 men rob a convenience store wearing watermelon rind disguises, say the police.
Now, wait a minute. We're living in a time where it's actually okay to go into a store wearing a mask.
Yeah, here's the problem. This wasn't necessarily a mask. They were wearing full watermelons.
like carved out watermelon.
The Huffington Post says that as disguises go, these were pretty seedy. 2 men are accused of robbing a convenience store on May 6th with full watermelons on their heads. Surveillance cameras at the Sheetz store.
Wait, what?
Yes, I know. I just caught that. caught the scofflaws in the act, but they managed to elude authorities thanks to their brilliant disguise, says the New York Post. That is until Sunday when authorities arrested 20-year-old Justin Rogers in connection with what seemed to be a melodrama. I hate the HuffPost.
Oh, God.
Oh,
Someone is
man.
they get the award for the worst puns in
They
one
really
story.
are. I should have cleaned this up. Rogers was booked on 3 charges, according to TMZ. Misdemeanor larceny of alcohol, misdemeanor possession of alcohol by an underage person, and felony possession of or wearing a mask covering his face in public.
I think I figured out the keyword you use in your news searches. Anyone that has to be either drunk or alcohol driven.
Yeah, I don't know why all these have, well, I do know why all these have an alcohol theme to them, because these people are idiots. Police are still on the lookout for the second person, according to the Pittsburgh Tribune Review. Candace Went, a customer at the convenience store where the robbery took place, thought the disguises fell in that thin line between stupid and clever. I think it's ridiculous, innovative, but ridiculous, she said to WRIC TV. The amount of work that they had to do to actually hollow out the watermelon to stick it on their head, I think is kind of crazy.
I'm assuming there's a picture of this somewhere.
There are. These 2 morons are standing there in one in a flannel shirt, one in a hoodie, with actual watermelons on their head.
So is it like the Charlie Brown thing? They carved out eyes, but they left room for their mouth?
Yep.
So they're the only ones who didn't have their faces covered, while their mouths covered. Everything else was covered just with watermelon.
Yeah, their entire head was just a watermelon.
Huh.
Well,
So, yeah.
It's a choice.
And of course, yes, it is a choice. That is right. That is the only right thing about this entire fiasco is it was a choice, and they chose poorly.
wow. Well, let's take it a different direction and give us a sort of a haunting irony of a story in Indonesia. We're going to go all the way across on the backside of the earth where a funeral was taking place. And it has tradition in a lot of the Indonesian culture. They have a glass window in the coffin as they are laying the body into the grave. They'll be able to say one last goodbye and look at the deceased as they put them into the earth. Well, apparently a lot of people had a bit of a freak out because as the priest was starting to say, God has said in the book of John, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, he will live though he is dead. It was at that very moment that the corpse apparently waved to everyone.
Yikes.
Wow.
Yes, to the horror and gasps of the crowd, the hand appeared to move directly in front of the window as if to say, all right, just after that line about whoever believes in me will live though he is dead. He's like, yep, here I am.
That's some good preaching there.
Yes. Now he waved and people thought maybe he's still alive and trying to dig his way out. Obviously, we know with the methodology of cleaning and taking care of the body, that's not true. Another person said maybe a mouse somehow got in there and is making that happen. So as the discussion ensued, it turned out that the gases still leaving the body at all different times can actually cause spontaneous movements. And it just happened to be a wonderful irony that as the priest was making the comment about eternal life, the dead body decided to wave to all of his friends, family, and loved ones who were looking down as he was being lowered into the grave.
I'm not dead yet.
I'm not dead. You will be. I'm still a little alive.
Reminds me of that Far Side where the bear is coming out of the coffin. He says, guys, I was hibernating. Don't you take a pulse?
Whoa. What's going on?
Little premature. Come on.
Can you guys not take a pulse? What is this?
So yeah, I thought you would enjoy that from our friends from on the other side of the world following a typical Catholics type service. But I don't know. I don't think I want to see a coffin with the window as I'm putting somebody down in the grave. That'd be weird.
No thanks.
I know that sometimes they're born that way as test tube babies, but I don't want to go into the ground in one of those. That's just weird.
Came into the world the way it came out.
That's right.
Oh.
A womb with a That's my time, folks. Good night. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, leave them laughing.
Yeah. Oh, so well, do you have any other news, or is that your coverage for today? I didn't know if you had a bonus.
Yeah, I think Watermelon Head kind of covered it.
You got it all in there with watermelon. All right. Well, as we begin to move to the wind down, we always like to take a few minutes and just give a few shout outs, but also maybe some recommendations of things that you and I and our guest hanging out with us, James Enstall, have been either watching, reading, streaming, or heck, maybe even listening to as other podcasts. We love giving love to the podcast community as well. So let's start. We won't put our guest on the hot seat just yet because, Walt, you and I are used to our format. Walt, anything that you want to throw out there for some recommendations to the listeners?
Yeah, I have got to compliment you for your choice last week on the documentary about Galaxy Quest. I watched that last night, man, and it was fantastic. And of course, I love the movie, so I had to go watch the movie as soon as I got done with it. But if you have not had a chance yet, go watch that. It's on Amazon Prime, I believe, and it is the Galaxy Quest documentary.
I think it's called Never Surrender.
It is Never Surrender. It is absolutely fantastic.
James, have you seen that?
I have not. No, I would love to. Was that on, you said Netflix?
Amazon Prime, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Prime. I will have to add that to my queue. That sounds great.
It is so good. And, for a movie that you would think, well, are they making fun of Trekkers? Are they making fun of the Star Trek convention goers? You realize the movie doesn't do that. It does a great job of really reflecting, but at the same time showing sort of an homage to that culture and what Star Trek has done for the world. It's an internationally known cultural phenomenon. The documentary, I think, takes it from that love letter approach of how they wanted to make that movie. And it is still one of my all-time favorite, even if you don't want to call it a sci-fi, it's a sci-fi movie to me. It's just an all-around great movie to watch.
Well, one of the people in it said, it was actually one of the writers from Star Trek 2009. His comment was, when we went back and we looked at everything, we realized this is the second best Star Trek movie.
I don't disagree with that. I don't disagree with that at all.
Yeah, I have to agree with him. Huh. And being a huge Star Trek fan, I've always loved Galaxy Quest. I mean, the first time I saw Galaxy Quest, it felt very familiar. It felt very home. And so I'm glad that so many other people find the same passion and warmth in that movie that they find in the Star Trek movies.
You know what I loved about what Galaxy Quest did is it took the stock kind of stereotype of Kirk and Spock and the relationship of the classic Star Trek, but it felt like they were also bringing in the next generation with a kid who's piloting the ship, who grows up, of course, now to be an adult, who's still trying to figure out, I was the kid actor. It's great. And it's such, again, a love letter to Star Trek fans. If you see that movie and you find yourself offended, there's something wrong with you.
Yes, I agree.
And plus, going back and seeing Alan Rickman in anything now is heartbreaking because he's no longer with us. But Alan Rickman in that movie was great.
James, you and I can both identify with the line just as he's about to storm out of the convention. And he's like, there's nothing you can tell me. The show must go on. Damn you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great line. Yeah. A great line. Well, the other one I'll mention, and I'm coming kind of late to the game on this one because season 2 has ended, but I watched The Righteous Gemstones. Have either one of y'all watched that?
No.
I have not.
So John Goodman, I mean, the cast of this is absolutely incredible. One of the main actors is the guy who played the pitcher in Eastbound and Down. So it is a little crass. It's a little over the top at times, but it's a show about a family that is kind of a televangelist family, but it shows the behind the scenes, just how corrupt they are and how the family just has all this infighting. It's a great comedy drama. And at the end, there is actually some redemptive aspect to it that was really kind of heartwarming actually at the end, as you and I don't want to give anything away, but if you can tolerate some tough language and a couple of adult situations, The Righteous Gemstones is definitely worth watching. And I thought that Walton Goggins was absolutely unbelievably good in this. He plays kind of the black sheep of the family and is absolutely amazing in that part.
Excellent. Well, it'll be something to check out.
Yeah. So how about you, Alan? What are you watching?
So the I'm going to talk about two movies that I watched this week. We were kind of flipping around and saying, oh, I want to check that out. I've always been a big fan of Melissa McCarthy. Even when she's in a really stupid movie, I've always thought, as bad as the movie might be around her falling all apart, there's something just about her acting, her ability to do both comedy, but I've always sensed, kind of like the Robin Williams, the Jim Carrey, that there's the ability to do drama there. It wasn't a great movie, but it was a great role for her. It was The Kitchen that came out last year, set in the 70s, where three women whose husbands were working sort of for the local arm of the mafia in Hell's Kitchen, New York. They all got arrested and sent off for a while. And so they didn't have jobs because they were, the wives of these mafia guys, and nobody in the mafia was wanting to take care of them. So they decided, you know what? We know the people in our own backyard better than these guys. We can run the protection racket because we'll take the protection money and we'll make sure that the people get what they're getting for that money. We're going to protect them from hoods and thieves. And it was a really interesting piece. There was a double cross nature. We see the evolution of the woman who was beat up her whole life, beat up by her husband. We see her evolution to the point where she, I don't want to give anything away. I just think it was a great character study. Not a great movie, but it was fun to watch Melissa McCarthy play a role like that. It was also with Tiffany Haddish and Elizabeth Moss. So I would check that out. And on the more gentle side, because I loved her in the movie It, I thought Sophia Lillis is such a cool actress. Nancy Drew in The Hidden Staircase. My wife just stumbled across it. I remember reading the Hardy Boys books growing up. She remember reading the Nancy Drew. We both remember watching in the late 70s, the television show on TV with the Hardy Boys and the Nancy Drew mysteries. So it was kind of fun to see her in her own standalone movie. This is not the same thing as the Nancy Drew series that you can stream, but it was a pretty good, and I'd say a fairly family-friendly movie that you can watch if you've got sort of the tweens, early teens crowd that you want to sort of maybe show them a mystery where there's things going on, and it may be a little scary for a younger kid, but I thought it was a lot of fun.
And who's in that?
Well, the main girl is Sophia Lillis. She's the one who played the redheaded girl in It, the reboot.
Gotcha.
She was great, and she's in that series. And James, you might know it. It's on. Oh my gosh, it's the series on Netflix right now where she's slowly realizing she's got some kind of superpowers, and something like, I don't like this happening to me. Oh God, what's the name of that show?
Oh, I know what show you're talking about because I saw the preview for it, but I can't think of the name of it right off.
I Am Not Okay With This. So check out that. I haven't seen it yet. My wife said it's great. She said if you've liked her in the movies you've seen, if you like this young up and coming actress, check out I Am Not Okay With This on Netflix.
Yeah, I keep seeing that come up as a suggested show. I'll have to check that out.
James, what about you? I know we're running out of time. Anything that you want to recommend that you might have seen in the last week or so?
Yeah, like everybody else, that's what's keeping me sane is binging shows. On Netflix, I personally, I know he's not everybody's cup of tea. I find Ricky Gervais to be the funniest human being currently drawing breath. And his show Afterlife, the second season of that just dropped last month, and it was hysterically funny. 1 minute you're laughing because it's so funny. The next minute you're crying because it's so sad and touching. It's an amazing show if you get the chance to watch it. Dead to Me season 2 just came out with Christine Applegate, which is a brilliant show. And on Amazon, we watched Tales of the Loop, which wasn't what I expected. Very interesting, little Twilight Zone-esque to it. And of course, I have to recommend Ozark. Jason Bateman and Laura Linney are just phenomenal in that show on Netflix.
Yeah, I'm almost done with season 2.
I would say great show and shot right in my backyard. Well, yours too, Walt, because they're using some of these areas of North Georgia and some of the lakes by us as the backdrop of the Ozarks.
Yes, that's right. In fact, the restaurant, whatever there, is the best boat ramp in the area. So that's but that is a great show, and Jason Bateman is amazing in it. One that I forgot, Alan, is it's an old movie. In my mind, it's the best forgotten World War II movie, and I watched it last night. It's called The Big Red One, and it has Lee Marvin and Mark Hamill.
It's great. That was before Mark Hamill became known as Luke Skywalker.
Well, it was actually right after. It was filmed before Star Wars,
right,
and it was released right after it. So everybody was like, "Oh my gosh, Mark Hamill is great." And
yeah, I didn't say that correctly. I should have said the production company. They didn't know who they had on their.
Oh,
hands.
they had no idea. So it is an amazing movie, great movie about a squad of guys from World War II that goes through Africa, through Sicily, D-Day, and on to the liberation of the camps, the concentration camps. So if you get a chance, you're going to have to pay $3.99, I think, or maybe $1.99 to watch it on Amazon Prime, but it is really worth the $1.99.
Great. Last thing, anything, any podcast shout outs, anything you want to give? We'll go to James first on this one. Obviously, Geek to Me Radio, that goes without saying. And The Wilder Ride, sure, that could be a good runner up. But beyond that, what else would we recommend as might be shows worth listening to?
Beyond those two, there's nothing else to listen to
There's
podcast-wise.
nothing
Just
else worthwhile.
stop your
Absolutely.
search now. No, there's Michael Rosenbaum, who has played Lex Luthor in Smallville. He was on the show Impastor. He has a show called Inside of You with Michael Rosenbaum, where he interviews different celebrities, and it gets very deep and psychological, and it's almost like a form of therapy. So I highly recommend that one. And James Gabsey, who's a friend of mine, has a podcast called Who Would Win, where they take two fictional characters, set them up in a fictional surrounding, and they have them go head to head with a moderator who decides the winner. It's a lot of fun if you're in the superhero type genre, or you just like a good nonsensical, shut my brain off and listen to these two guys fight it out type of podcast.
Excellent. Walt, what about you?
One that I want to throw out there, it's one of the Movie by Minute, and we've talked about it before, but Top Secret Minute goes through the movie Top Secret. And that is a great comedy from the 80s. And I've been trying to catch up on that show. And the guys that do it they do a great job of doing what we don't do, and that is staying on topic. But they really do.
I was a guest, and I think they were going, dude, it's been like 25 minutes, and we're still in the same. I mean, are you done? I'm like,
yeah, they did that with me on both the Top Secret Minute. Then they were generous enough to have me back for the Office Space Minute. And so either one of those two shows are great. And they really do a fantastic job of hitting minute by minute, staying in that minute and staying on topic. So if you're looking for one that just kind of goes through, gives you a lot of information about the movie that you didn't know, and revisits those two great comedies, either one of those two shows are definitely worth the time.
All right, I'm just going to give one shout out this time. I'm going to do one for a show that I actually was pulled in to be one of a panel of 3 called The ABCs of Fording Ahead. It's actually, that's the name of the show underneath the banner of 60 Minutes With. I talked about them last week, about all the different shows they have. But the cool thing about the ABCs of Fording Ahead, it's 3 guys who have had their share of life experiences, who have all figured out, or at least they think they have, how to stay positive when things seem to be falling apart around you. And so the entertaining aspect is to sometimes maybe get a little glimpse into the fact that not everybody's life is perfect, but there's a way you can approach everything with a more positive, upbeat attitude. And it's amazing how much that can change the outcome of any situation. And so it's on the podcast 60 Minutes With. Look for the hashtag or the show title, The ABCs of Fording Ahead. Just had an episode drop a couple weeks ago from when this drops, and from when you're here listening to this here. And it's a monthly show, so you can subscribe. You may not like all the content. I think it's great, but check that one out, because I think in times when things are tough, having a background in psychology, I realized I was never going to be cut out to be a counselor. I don't have the patience, but I can tell some folks what I've learned through having 4 daughters, a wife, one marriage go bad, one is doing very, very well, having a great time. It's not all peaches and roses every single day, but you can make every day a fantastic day if you set your mind to it. And that's kind of the whole basis behind that show. So I would encourage anybody who's looking for a pick-me-up that doesn't sound like a Dr. Phil episode, check out the ABCs of Fording Ahead.
Yeah, it definitely doesn't sound like a Dr. Phil episode, but it is really good.
No, not at all.
Really, really good.
All right, James, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you being part of our show and hanging out and playing till the end of it.
Thanks for having me, guys. It's a great pleasure. I'm honored that you had me on, and continued success to you both.
Thank you so much. Walt, very quickly, let the good folks know where they can learn to run into us on social media.
Yeah, as usual, the best place to find us is going to be on our website at thewilderride.com. And from there, you can find us on Instagram and all the other places. But go to Facebook, facebook.com/thewilderride. Follow us there, and then hit the button right behind it to join the listeners group. And the listeners group is great because there's information about our show, but more importantly, there's all kinds of stuff that people are posting about other podcasts that they're listening to, movies that they love, clips from some of the great shows or movies, and just a lot of great discussion. And I love when I'm sitting there and get a notification that somebody posted in the group, because who knows what you're going to get, but it's always something really fun and just some great discussion that goes on, gives the fans of the show an opportunity to really participate. And I love our listeners group. So
I do too.
Take the time to join that.
Much like we said with James earlier, we engage with all of our listeners. We try to stay on top of it immediately. And I think, like Walt said, when we see that little badge pop up and says, you've got 7 unknown or unread messages, or I get excited. I go, oh, cool. I get to find out what people have been posting or saying or responding. And we love responding back. Hey guys, come on back next week. We're going to have another episode. This is a weekly show. That's what we're endeavoring. We're already lining up guests into the next couple of months. And we're going to have every week somebody different and fun to talk to. And hopefully you guys are enjoying it. Leave us some feedback. If you like what you're hearing, you're enjoying yourself, share it with friends and family. Share the link. If you're listening right now on whatever podcatcher, hit that share button and share it on your social media. It makes it so easy to be able to share the episode. And we would really, really appreciate that. Walt, until next week.
Hey, I'm looking forward to it. And do we have another guest next week, or is it just the two of us?
No, it would never be just the two of us. No one's going to listen to just the two of us.
Well, we can make it if we try.
Just the two of us.
We'll have a surprise guest next week.
Surprise. I don't know who we have. We'll have to figure it out.
We will figure it out.
We'll figure it out just before we go live.
Yeah, there you go. No show prep. Why would we want that?
When you hit the dance floor, you gotta be jumping.